All right. Again, sorry about that, guys. So we're for those of you who I don't know, my name is Chris Anderson. As Spencer alluded to, I am the chair of the Mahoning County Democratic Party. I promise I usually have a much easier time with technology than I'm having tonight, so I sincerely apologize. Um, we wanted to try and get everyone together and try and get as much information out as we can about issue one, because what we've seen coming out of the Ohio Republican Party and what we've seen coming out of and what we've seen frankly coming out of a lot of the Republicans at the state level. Hold on one second. If my voice is, I'll switch my microphone here.
That's much better.
Is that better? All right. Yeah, I don't know what the deal with that was. Lauren, did my voice sound like that on the last call that we were on?
Yeah, it did. Just towards the end.
Okay. All right. Well, so, but like I said, to set the stage, we wanted to have this call to combat a lot of the misinformation that you may be seeing, and to make sure that you get all your questions answered before you head to the Board of Elections, but also so that you have information so you can talk to your friends and family and your own networks about this. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of dive right into it. And I'll open this up to State Rep McNally or to Spencer. Explain what issue one is for anyone who, as if they have absolutely no idea what any of the nonsense we've seen out of Frank LaRose is about.
Spencer, do you want to explain it, or?
Oh, sure. I feel like it's just how far back do we go? There have been so many layers of this saga, but just for a very basic understanding, first off, gerrymandering is when politicians or people who support politicians draw maps in a certain way to dilute the votes of the people they don't want to represent or that they don't want to win, and empower the voters unrealistically or unfairly empower voters who they do want in their districts. And so really gerrymandering is the result of a situation where people who are in power or politicians are able to draw their own districts and choose their voters rather than voters choosing their politicians. And Ohio has been one of the most gerrymandered states in the country for years. It's currently one of the 10 most gerrymandered in the country. And that's because we have tried many times to defeat gerrymandering here in the state of Ohio and to take power out of the hands of politicians and put it in the hands of citizens. The most recent time that we tried to do that was in 2015 and 2018, where we changed the rules for how maps were drawn, and in doing so, we compromised, or the voter rights coalition, the people who are fighting against gerrymandering, because, just to be very clear, it is very expensive and difficult to get a statewide issue on the ballot. And so when folks were going to go and try and put a statewide issue on the ballot back a few years ago, about 10 years ago, they were having trouble. They were getting ready to do that, but politicians sat down with them. They compromised on a deal that would allow politicians to still be in charge of redistricting, but it would put up really strict guardrails around what they could or couldn't do. So we were trying to put a Band-Aid on the problem without really solving the problem, which is the fact that politicians were in control. We were depending on the idea and on the trust that politicians would follow the Constitution of the state of Ohio, that they would follow the directive of the Ohio Supreme Court. Well, as probably everyone here has seen or has heard about, in the last few years, we've seen just how far people in power will go in order to keep that power, even if it is unfair. The Republicans at the statewide level who wanted to draw our maps in a gerrymandered way defied the Ohio Supreme Court 7 times. 7 times. The Ohio Supreme Court, and to be clear, this was an Ohio Supreme Court with a Republican Chief Justice and a Republican majority that told the Republicans who were drawing the maps that they were drawing were unconstitutional 7 times. And instead of listening to the Ohio Supreme Court, the politicians simply ignored them and delayed until it was too late to change the maps. And we had to run on unfair and unconstitutional maps. And so that's how we landed where we are now. The Citizens Not Politicians campaign successfully put issue 1 on the ballot. And issue 1 goes back and it fixes the root of the problem, which is politicians choosing their voters. And so if we pass issue 1, we're going to take the power out of the hands of politicians. No longer will the Ohio governor, auditor, and secretary of state be deciding which lines are drawn in certain ways. No more will our state legislative leaders be determining how our lines are drawn. We are going to take politicians entirely out of the process. Issue 1 will ban politicians and lobbyists from drawing the maps and put it in the hands of an independent redistricting commission that is made up of 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents. Additionally, the commission will have a ton of different roles I'm happy to talk about that make sure that these maps will be fair. And so long story short, happy to dive into any more of this. Long story short is that politicians have been in charge of drawing our maps for far too long, and issue 1 will take that power out of their hands.
That was perfectly said.
Yeah, very well said. Did you have anything you wanted to add, State Rep McNally?
Yeah, I mean, I can just maybe fill in a couple of small blanks. Currently, the redistricting commission is made up of the Secretary of State, appointees from the House and Senate, and a governor appointee. And so it's more heavily Republican than Democratic. We only have 2 Democrats on the commission of 5 people, 3 Republicans. And the new one will have, like we said, 15 people on it. There will be a long application process. They will be vetted by 4 retired judges in the state. And it will also include a public hearing portion of the redistricting process by which these 15 people will travel the state holding public hearings to really understand the changing needs and dynamics of the state when it comes to redistricting.
Great. So that kind of brings us to one of the submitted questions here of why are folks so opposed to essentially ending gerrymandering? What is at stake for the opponents of ending gerrymandering here? And I have some very choice words that I would like to say regarding the folks who oppose ending gerrymandering, but knowing that we're being recorded here, I'll leave it to more diplomatic people.
I mean, we went from having a state that was made up of a 54% share vote for the Republican Party, 46% share vote for the Democratic Party in statewide elections over the previous decade, to in the 2022 elections, Republicans winning 68% of the seats, and in the House, and 79% of the seats in the Ohio Senate. So we've gotten really far away from that sort of middle split that we're supposed to have. And so why would you give up guaranteed power? And that's why the only reason they've had no other reasons by which to say they're against ending gerrymandering. Instead, they're actually using the term gerrymandering in their own advertisements and things. They put it in the ballot language itself as an anti-gerrymandering ballot, and ballot language that was confusing, is confusing the people because it's an unpopular idea, and to be opposed to ending gerrymandering, and they know that, and so they're using every trick in the book. But the groups that are against this, that have come out against it, I mean, they are the ones that are the extremist groups that we've known for a long time. The Ohio Value Voters, the Center for Christian Virtue has a group underneath it that's against this. And obviously the Republican Party. The Republican Party is the one that is funding the opposition to issue 1. And the only reason is because they risk losing that super majority power that they currently have in a very comfortable way at the state house.
And, you know, I've long said that Ohio is not a red state. Ohio is a rigged state. You know, to put into perspective, like State Rep McNally alluded to, Republicans in Ohio get roughly, 54 or 55% of the vote, something like that. And then they award themselves veto-proof supermajorities. So, I mean, that's not representative democracy there. And, you know, to be perfectly clear, all around the country, gerrymandering has been done by both parties, and it's been wrong every time that it's happened. Because what ends up happening is you have people that are only interested in appeasing the special interests and the fringes of their parties. And, you know, for me personally, it looks like the folks that are most vehemently opposed are A, the people risking losing those veto-proof supermajorities, and B, the special interests that keep them in power too. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Spencer. Go ahead.
No, not at all. You're 100% correct. But let's just take a step back and be really honest about the reality here. If you are a Republican in the state of Ohio who doesn't have a genuine desire to talk to your constituents, to go to town halls, to knock on doors, to work hard to win your seat, to explain the votes you take, gerrymandering is a damn good deal for you, right? As Chris mentioned, 45% to 48% of the state of Ohio consistently votes for Democrats at various levels of local, state, and federal office. And yet at the Ohio House, Republicans have 66% of the seats, and in the Ohio Senate, they have 78% of the seats. Those are not representative numbers, and those are the majorities that allow them to do crazy extremist shit. What the difference is between a fair legislature and an extremist gerrymandered legislature is a legislature where, yes, the Ohio citizen or the Ohio value voters and other far right organizations are able to get through pieces of legislation because in a fair legislature where those Republicans would actually have to go back and talk to their seats where they might have 48 or 45 or 46% of people in their districts voting for Democrats. They have to moderate their opinions. They have to work harder to win those votes. And so they're not able to do those crazy extremist things. So sure, the extremist groups are going to oppose gerrymandering reform because they need gerrymandering. They need the extremism that gerrymandering creates in order to get their policies passed. When you have gerrymandering like you have in the state of Ohio, the vast majority of our elected officials in the state legislature and in Congress are chosen in primary elections where only members of one party get to vote. The Republican nominee voted on by a handful of Republicans is going to be more to the right than the person who's probably chosen by everyone fairly. And so what this system really creates is more extremism and more polarization. And so, yes, if you are a Republican in power right now, you have not needed to worry about your seat in decades, unless you're the unlucky handful of folks who live in the very small number of competitive seats that are created. But the reality is that if you're a Republican in the state of Ohio, you don't really have to worry about running and earning your votes because they're drawn for you. You get to draw your own seats. You get to determine what your own district looks like. And so let's not pretend like this isn't a great deal for Republicans. The other people it's a great deal for are the lobbyists who depend on those Republicans to stay in power and to enrich themselves. The reason you have corruption like we saw with HB 6 and with Larry Householder, the former Republican Speaker of the House who is now in federal prison, the only reason that was ever allowed to happen is because we had gerrymandered districts where voters, even though they were upset about the corruption that was happening, didn't have the political power to actually get rid of the people who were corrupt. And so, you know, if you are a Republican in power in the state of Ohio, gerrymandering is a great thing. If you're a lobbyist in power in the state of Ohio, gerrymandering is a great thing. If you are anyone else, you should be voting yes on issue 1 because it means putting power back in your hands and not in their hands.
So I will, you know, I'll also add, I should say that, Sorry, my kids are in the background. It's a little bit hectic in the background here. So I will also add that it's important. I try to give you an idea on what gerrymandering does here. If you take the current ideas of the hyper partisan super fringe Ohio General Assembly, the Republicans in the Ohio General Assembly right now, and you extrapolate that over the course of the state and the country, I should say, those ideas are so wildly unpopular that if they had to run and win on those ideas, if it wasn't for gerrymandering and the Electoral College, they would be less relevant than a minor political party in the United Kingdom. We're not talking about the Tories. We're not talking about the Labour Party. We're talking like Brexit Now or Reform UK relevant, to give you an idea. So it's not just Democrats who want to end gerrymandering. In 2015, we passed an amendment like this that said that overwhelmingly, damn near 80% of the state voted for and said we want fair maps. So that actually leads us to our next question here of couldn't they just ignore this amendment the way that they did in 2015?
I can start. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, first off, the people who put the voter rights advocates, the democracy advocates who put this proposed constitutional amendment together, issue one together, knew full and well this all happened after the leaders of the Ohio Redistricting Commission, the Republicans on the Ohio Redistricting Commission, refused to follow the Ohio Supreme Court 7 times. And so when folks were putting this together and when this policy was crafted, folks knew full and well that they had to put in provisions into the amendment that would stop politicians from being able to just flatly refuse to follow the law like they have in the past. And so that's the first thing. I think there are provisions in the amendment itself that do not allow for the governor or the Senate minority or majority leader or anyone like that to be able to do what they did last time, which is just flatly ignore the Ohio Supreme Court. The second part of this, and I think this is the more important part, is that the last constitutional referendums and amendments were a compromise, and they were built around the idea that we would set up very strict guardrails and we would really box in politicians to force them to make fair districts, that we would set up so many rules that they had to follow so that they couldn't gerrymander the state of Ohio, even if they wanted to. Now, of course, they went off and decided they were just going to do it anyway and ignore the rules. And so that last reform was really based on a principle of, frankly, trust. We trusted our elected officials. We trusted our leaders to follow the laws of the state of Ohio, to respond and follow the directive of the Ohio Supreme Court. That trust no longer exists. Issue one does not depend on that trust to exist. That's because while before we were putting power in the hands of politicians, but saying you can't use it in certain ways, we're now taking the power out of their hands completely. So at no point in time now can a politician stand in the way of allowing the Ohio Redistricting Commission, as it will be formed, the Independent Redistricting Commission, if issue one passes, from doing the work of the commission, setting the maps, and putting fair elections into process here in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, it went so far as to actually, the amendment has funding built right into it. A cap funding as well as a floor funding so that the state legislature can't just not fund it so that it can't do the thing it needs to do. So, this is a really thoughtful and thought out amendment.
It's almost like it was partially written by a former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court who knew all of the loopholes that her party would try to exploit. Oh, actually, that's exactly what happened. So for anyone who doesn't know, Citizens Not Politicians, the group that did so much work to help get this on the amendment, is actually a bipartisan group that's led by former Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who's a Republican, by the way, and not exactly a liberal Republican either. She was a former lieutenant governor of the state of Ohio. And it's co-led in part. This is the work that Eric Holder is doing since he's retired from practicing law. So it is a truly bipartisan led organization. And so we've gotten a few questions in this space So I think before we start getting into these questions, it's important to kind of set the stage for why when you drive down the street you see a yard sign, for example, that says vote yes on issue 1 and gerrymandering, and then you see another one that says vote yes or vote no on issue 1, ban gerrymandering. So I'll let you two lead the conversation here on frankly the deception campaign that we're seeing out of the Ohio Republican Party. And then two, there was another question about the ballot board, about what happened with the ballot language. So if we can make sure we address that in the explanation.
Yeah. Well, if we take a really big step back, just to be very honest, what happened here was that the folks who want to reform gerrymandering put a constitutional amendment together, did the incredibly painstaking work of getting it on the ballot, got it through the attorney general's revisions multiple times, secured all of the signatures, got approved by the Secretary of State, and then went to the ballot board, and the ballot board changed it. Not the amendment, but the summary. But if we go back, I mean, really just the reality here is that over the last 4 years, Ohioans at large have gone from not knowing what gerrymandering is to hating gerrymandering, because every single time the Republicans in charge of our redistricting process defied the Ohio Supreme Court, there were 10 articles in every newspaper across the state about what they were doing, about flying in the face of democracy. And so if you look at polling now in the state of Ohio, gerrymandering is wildly unpopular. So when Republicans in power were thinking about how to stop gerrymandering reform, they knew from the get-go that they couldn't make a real argument that was in favor of gerrymandering. They couldn't make a real argument about the policies that were being presented. So what they went for instead was deception. And that started with the ballot board. That started with the committee of a majority of Republicans, again, very similar to the folks who draw the maps, who are given a charge by this Constitution of the state of Ohio to create a fair and impartial summary that will help a voter understand a complicated amendment as it is placed on their ballot. And frankly, they went nuclear. They decided not only just to manipulate some of the wording, but to completely change what the amendment is in their summary. They, rather than even make an argument against it, they decided to take an anti-gerrymandering proposal and just call it pro-gerrymandering. They said, well, this will mandate gerrymandering, and in order to get through the legal process, they basically just changed the definition of gerrymandering. They said, well, gerrymandering is when you draw maps to try and reach a political outcome, and they pointed to proportionality and said, well, if you're trying to get proportionality, you're going to have to gerrymander the state. That's not true. The reality is that if our state is 45 to 48% Democratic and we draw maps fairly, the likely outcome is that about 45, 48% of the seats will go to Democrats and about the remainder will go to Republicans. And so they really just changed the definition. And I honestly just don't believe that they believe it. They know what they're doing. They know it's deception. They know that they're trying to confuse and manipulate people, but they're hopeful that people will walk into the ballot box knowing they dislike gerrymandering and see the language on the ballot and decide to vote the wrong way. And so we need to do everything in our power to make sure folks understand that if they oppose gerrymandering, if they're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whoever, if you want politicians and lobbyists in charge, you have to vote no on issue 1. But if you want the people of Ohio, if you want citizens in charge, if you want citizens to be picking their politicians and not the other way around, you have to vote yes.
And it's important to point out that the role that the Supreme Court also played in the ballot board situation, there was obviously a lawsuit and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court essentially allowed to go forward. I mean, they said yes to some things, they said no to some things, it went back to the ballot board. The ballot board did worse things the second time around than it did the first time around, the language. And ultimately, the Supreme Court is the one who is allowing the gerrymandering language to move forward, even though it is deceptive.
I think it's important to point out when we're talking about the Ohio Supreme Court, I tend to call them the MAGA majority on the Ohio Supreme Court. But when we're talking about the Ohio Supreme Court, you're talking about the same people here who recently ruled on the side of some incredible lobbyists to actually allow businesses that are food businesses to sell you boneless chicken wings that contain bones. They said that businesses are under no obligation to actually provide you boneless chicken wings. To give you an idea, so the idea that they would rubber stamp something that's come out of this ballot board is by no means outside of the realm of what we've come to expect out of them. So does anyone have any questions on how we've arrived? Because the questions that are remaining here. It's important that we all kind of are on the same page about how we arrived where we are before we get into some of these more technical questions. You should be able to unmute yourselves. I think I changed the permissions, so if you have questions, you can hop off and mute about how we arrived here. Anything else we're going to get to here in a little bit.
And while you're thinking of that, in case you have anything, the other thing you might be thinking is, well, wasn't there a Republican Supreme Court that seemed pretty principled on making sure that they found these unconstitutional maps unconstitutional 7 times? Why are they now turning around and doing these partisan tricks and playing the ballot board's game? Well, this is a different Supreme Court. And the change that happened is because the Ohio legislature, in its extremist gerrymandered supermajorities, decided to go against the Ohio Bar Association. They went against the Ohio Association of Justices, all of the former Ohio Supreme Court justices who came out, and they decided to make the Ohio Supreme Court a partisan position. They put a D or an R next to the name of the candidates at the top of the ballot, so that way they could have their partisan party loyalists on the Ohio Supreme Court rather than having independent jurists elected at large by the state of Ohio. And so if you're thinking, wow, this Ohio Supreme Court sounds a hell of a lot more partisan than it used to, and is playing a lot of more political games than they used to, you're right. It was designed that way by this gerrymandered supermajority in order to receive the type of judicial backup that they needed in order to do the crazy things they want to do.
Yeah, it's definitely not a rational court by any means. So one of the questions that came through as we're talking about this deception campaign that's going on is a member of the group here. They asked the question, I'm wondering how it's okay for the Ohio Republican Party to have stop gerrymandering on their no on issue 1 sign. So I think we talked about that. I think we touched on that. But let's take it a step further here, because the individual also wants to know, how is it legal to deliberately try to deceive voters? So without pulling out that's just their standard playbook card, I'd be interested to hear both of your takes on that.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Rosanna.
It's very difficult to answer this diplomatically, isn't it?
It's hard to answer because it doesn't make rational sense, right? But at the end of the day, the ballot board gets its laws from the Ohio Revised Code, which basically gives it complete autonomy. And complete autonomy means you can do whatever you want to do. And if the place that you would go to challenge, what you're doing, to say, hey, you're doing a bad thing, you're doing a wrong thing, aka the courts, you'd sue. The courts have already said where they stand. The courts are the son of the governor and the appointee of the governor, who, by the way, this is the first time he's ever even served on a court. So the people have nowhere to go to challenge right or wrong in the state of Ohio anymore because of gerrymandering and the supermajority. And you can say it about this issue, you can say it about all of the issues that we've faced at the State House in the last 2 years. There's no concept of right or wrong because you can't bring a challenge forward anymore, because there's no balance of power. There's no checks and balances left on the supermajority at the State House or at this point in the Supreme Court.
Well, and if I could do another small history lesson, because I didn't know too much about this either. So the Ohio actually had a law on the books for a little over 40 years that said it's illegal to lie, explicitly lie in your campaign for the Ohio House, Ohio Senate, US Congress. Unfortunately, the United States Supreme Court found on multiple occasions that lying in politics cannot be made illegal by the government because it would have the result of killing what they call legitimate political discourse. And so in 2016, an appeals court down in Cincinnati actually struck down the law that Ohio had on the books for over 40 years, banning lying in politics. So, even if we wanted to, even if I as a citizen said, hey, this is BS. You can't lie to voters about what you're talking about. You can't lie to voters about what's in issue one and pretend like it is something that it's not. I'm going to take you to the Ohio Supreme Court. I'm going to hold you accountable. There's no law. They're not breaking any law. They can legally lie to you. And so, what the United States Supreme Court has said, and like it or not, is the reality that we have to live under is that the government is not the final arbiter of truth. The people have to be the final arbiter of truth. We can only win, issue one if we go out and tell people the truth about what's happening and we debunk those lies. And so, yeah, there's no real legal discourse or there's no real legal method to be able to deal with these lies. We really just have to deal with it at the ballot box.
Right. Yeah, that's the unfortunate nature of the world that we live in, between the Supreme Court saying politicians just have no, and don't get me, so let me backtrack here. Your actual legislators, like State Rep McNally, if you're talking to her in an actual official capacity, if you've got a real meeting with her, she does have an obligation to tell you the truth. When she's a candidate, she has no obligation to tell you the truth. So there's an important distinction there. Not that you would have to worry about that with State Rep McNally here, but go talk to State Rep for 7 minutes, Tex Fisher, and it's a completely different story. So hopefully that clears that up as to the how they're doing this. So I've got this mantra that we've started to talk about a lot here, and it's that when Republicans can't win on their ideas, they cheat, and when they can't cheat, they try to change the rules. And that you're getting the entire playbook here. You're getting lying, you're getting cheating, you're getting changing the rules. And
what are they going to do next? Once we pass this, you bet your butt they're going to do everything they can to change something to hold on to what they have, whether it's changing the definition of something that seems too generic in the language, whether it's they have the money to put towards fighting their loss, and they do it over and over again, as we've seen in the last couple of years where we've been to hell and back with ballot issues. So I don't expect us to win in November and then walk away with the problem solved, to be completely honest.
November 5th is the first step. If we win issue one, that's the first step to getting fair maps in the state of Ohio. Unfortunately, Representative McNally's colleagues in the Ohio House and Senate, the Republicans have the ability as of right now. Now, if Democrats are able to pick up a few seats in the Ohio House, this mathematics might change a little bit. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you go vote for your Democratic candidate for the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. But right now, and if things stay the same, which they're looking roughly similar to what they are right now, Ohio Republicans will be able to put up a constitutional amendment if they want to completely reverse issue one as soon as May of next year, if they so desire to do so. So please don't stop paying attention. Issue one passing is the most important thing that we can worry about right now. We got to go tell people the truth about what issue one does, about the fact that it bans politicians and lobbyists from drawing maps and puts the power into the hands of Democrats, Republicans, independent citizens of the state of Ohio. And we need to then go make sure they implement it and hold them to account. I know folks here probably remember last year when issue 1 passed in November, protecting reproductive freedom. The first thing the Senate president, Matt Huffman, came out and said was, well, it doesn't really matter. We're going to do what we want anyway. We're going to attack this bill. We're going to ban abortion in some different ways, et cetera, et cetera. But the only reason that hasn't happened is because enough people have showed up and stopped them from doing that. And so we're going to have to do the same thing with democracy too. Issue 1 passing is step 1.
Yeah, I've the best way to think about it, to be honest with you, is in August of 2023, the voting no on issue 1 saved democracy in our state. In November of 2023, we saved women's reproductive freedom in our state. This is the first step in actually saving our state from fringe extremists. I think one of the most tragic things about the state of Ohio is that our chief export is young people. And when you think about your kids leaving or your grandkids leaving, or just kids that have been in your lives leaving, this is one of the biggest drivers, is the fringe policies you've seen out of the Ohio General Assembly. Think about how many times, I can attest to it. I know that State Rep McNally can attest to it. I know Spencer can. Folks they'll come right out and say, I don't want to live in Ohio. I don't want to, I don't want to move there, or, I'm going to move here. I'm going to move somewhere else. And it's these fringe policies. I mean, look at Intel is building a giant facility in Central Ohio where the median salary starting there is something like $90-something thousand a year, if I remember right. And they can't find folks that work for Intel that want to move here because of these policies. The only thing that we lead the country in, to my knowledge, is population loss. And it's because of gerrymandering. So we've talked about the general deception campaign that's going on. Let's debunk some of the other my kids are in bed now, so I can just say some of the other bullshit that we've seen coming out of the no side of this. The first one actually came from Ken here in the chat. Let's talk about this rumor that folks can never be removed, like they're somehow appointing justices to the U.S. Supreme Court from the redistricting commission. So I have the actual amendment pulled up here, but before I get into that, I'll let both of them touch on it, and then I'll give you the exact language of what you need to know in the amendment.
Just give them the language, Chris. That's all they need.
Yeah. So first off,
I was going to say, it's pretty clear, actually.
Yeah. So it's important to note, when they're appointing people to the commission itself, they're not serving lifetime appointments. Once the maps are drawn and approved, that's it. They're no longer on the commission because the commission no longer exists. The commission only exists once every 10 years to draw districts, and that's centered around the census. So they're just hoping that people don't know basic US civics, and that's that redistricting happens around the census, because once the redistricting is done, the commission goes away. But because, again, you've got to remember, this amendment was written by a former Attorney General of the United States and an Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice. There are guardrails in place for if sitting commissioners on the commission act like dicks, to be honest. So this is just straight out of the FAQs around the amendment. A commissioner may be removed by the members of the Citizens Redistricting Commission for cause after notice, a public hearing, and an opportunity for members of the public to comment on said commissioner's removal. Cause for removal includes failure to disclose requested information during the application process, aka you lied about whether you've been a lobbyist or whether you've been a party official, or something of that nature. Willful neglect or gross misconduct or malfeasance in office. So if you go and you just blatantly disregard the Ohio Revised Code's provisions that we've already voted on for redistricting, an incapacity or inability to perform his or her duties or behavior, including moral turpitude. I have no idea what on God's green earth moral turpitude is. Or other acts that undermine the public's trust in the commission and the redistricting process. So again, the point when we're talking about that as a whole is they're not appointed for life. It's not like these people are going to It's not like these people are going to redistrict for us in 2020 or in 2030, and then again in 2040, and then in 2050. They serve for the life of the commission, and then if they want to serve on it again, they have to reapply, and it's not an easy application process. And that even if they do get into this, there are mechanisms to remove them. So that one, for anybody who reads Politico, I'd give that one a solid 5 Pinocchios.
Well, and Chris, I thank you for explaining that, because it is very well spelled out in the amendment. I don't think there's a single thing in this amendment that you can think of that they haven't already thought of. Folks sat around and really worked hard to make sure that this was going to be a foolproof amendment that could not be undermined by politicians in power. But I find the argument that the opposition is making around not being able to remove someone genuinely comical, because they seem to forget about the process we have currently. The process we have right now involves the governor, the auditor, and the secretary of state sitting down in a back room with the majority leader of the House and the Senate president, and they come together and they draw these maps, and then they bring it out to the commission, and the 5 of them support it, and the 2 Democrats who are on the commission, or just the 2 minority members, whoever they end up being, vote no, and then they move on. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no mandated, public comment. There's no mandated transparency. There's no mandated ethics rules. What they are allowed to do is what they did. They brought out a map at 11:59 and passed it so that they would get in before the deadline with little to no people seeing or commenting on it beforehand. But let's say you even got the opportunity to do all that. Let's say, Keith Faber, as auditor who sits on the Ohio Redistricting Commission right now, did something that was so egregious that Democrats, Republicans, and independents all across the state of Ohio said that man should not be on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. The current system's solution to that problem is, well, looks like you're going to have to wait 4 years and vote for someone else. Oh, also, that new person is not going to draw new maps. That is only going to happen 10 years from now. So you have to deal with 10 years of deeply gerrymandered maps and the legislature that results from deeply gerrymandered maps attacking your voting rights and your reproductive rights and your public education and every single thing that you care about. But don't worry, in 10 years, maybe you'll have someone else. I mean, is that really the better system? Is that the system that they're so desperate to cling on to? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that right now there's absolutely no mechanism to remove someone who sits on the redistricting commission. So this actually creates one. So that's a great point. So Ken, did that give you what you need? Does that answer your question?
It does. And just to kind of be very frank, there is so much conversation out there on what's the app that I get some of the things from. I think it's called Nextdoor, and where one person is they're like the spokesperson for everywhere. I did want to have one follow-up question. This is probably a number that Spencer has just based on the earlier number. I mean, I heard the statewide number, the percentages of Republican and Democrat and what the representation is. What is it in our area? And I'm only asking, we've only lived in Ohio for about 10 years. We live in Boardman, and just kind of what does that picture look like, for the folks that are voting along with me next door?
So that's actually probably a better question for Lauren and I, because Spencer is actually in Columbus, but we won't hold that against him.
Sure. Well, my daughter's so I won't hold him against him either.
So our area is turned into a pretty purple district, or a pretty purple county. We used to be one of the bluest counties in the state of Ohio, but thanks to things like gerrymandering, for example, and the fringe policies that drove a lot of folks out, combined with some other complicated factors, economic factors, etc. We are pretty much as purple as they get. To give you an idea, obviously State Rep McNally is a Democrat. Her counterpart in the Senate, I'm not even going to acknowledge the counterpart in the House because he hasn't been there long enough for me to truly care. He was, for anybody who doesn't know, the State House appointed Tex and then immediately adjourned. So he sat in active session as a state rep for less than 5 minutes. So her counterpart in the Senate is a Republican. But then when you look at our county government, 90-something% of our elected officials are Democrats. So again, it's about as purple as it gets. we are an example of, of fighting an uphill battle against gerrymandering because, for example, Mike Kripchak is an incredible congressional candidate, right? He's running in Ohio 6 against Mike Ruley. Almost beat him in a special election in June, July, something like that. Almost beat him in a special election there. That district actually runs from Mahoning County. It encompasses all of Mahoning County to the southern tip of the state of Ohio. They added, when we look at Al Catrona's district, they added oh god, I always mess this up, Carroll County to that district to completely dilute the voting power of Youngstown, Boardman, and Austintown, because those populations are roughly the same as Carroll County, the voting populations, I should say.
They did it to the city of Youngstown with my district, and they took the city of Youngstown, and instead of what it used to be, which is the city of Youngstown and the suburbs that touch Youngstown, it's now the city of Youngstown, Poland, and Columbiana County. So that the city of Youngstown's voting power got diluted.
Yeah,
right.
Well, and while I don't live in Youngstown or in the Mahoning Valley, I have had the pleasure of visiting many, many times, and I do too much political stuff. So I actually know that not only have they gerrymandered your state house seats and your congressional seats, they also gerrymandered your state senate. There is a really easy way to draw a state senate district that would include Trumbull and Mahoning counties. This would be a very competitive seat, probably right on the line, would probably force politicians on both sides to work really hard to earn your vote. And it would probably be good for democracy generally. Instead of allowing that to happen, they drew a line and they separated Trumbull County from Mahoning County. So that way the Democrats up in Warren and associated communities are voting in a 58% Republican state Senate seat. And the folks down in Youngstown and South, down to Boardman and Salem, are now also voting in a 58 Republican seat. So now, despite the fact that you have, as Chris very well put, a blue purplish community, a sizable population that could have its representation in the Ohio Senate. And look, even if it ended up electing a Republican, it would probably be a more moderate Republican if they had to win over Democratic votes in order to be elected. Also a more moderate Democrat if they had to win over Republican votes to be elected. But instead of even risking it, Republicans split Warren from Youngstown and put Warren in one state Senate seat and Youngstown in a different one, so that you would have zero opportunity to be able to flip either of those seats. And it's just gerrymandering.
Well, that is a much stronger point than you giving me the numbers of the entire state. So thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I pictured us being, but did not have that information. As I talk with folks around my neighborhood, and I feel like we're in a purple, fairly blue area. And I don't feel that is our representation. So that was a very clear picture. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there, we've got a few minutes left here, so we want to just kind of open it up to any other questions that anybody else may have about issue 1 or really anything. We're I can't speak for them, but I'm happy to field any questions, so I'm sure they will as well. Anybody?
Pretty quiet group.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I tried to open up the questions beforehand.
Yeah.
That's why I tried to open up the questions beforehand, because some people don't like to ask them live, which I understand.
So knowing that we're a very strong blue or purple area, if you were knocking on doors and doing, cold calls and stuff like that, where are we doing that? Because I don't need anyone to come knock on my door. I live in a fairly progressive, even neighborhood, if you will. There's a lot of YSU teachers that are in my neighborhood as well. Sure. I think I've had Katrona knocked on our door one day, the last cycle. And I'm like, yeah, I'll listen, but I'm done with you.
Yeah.
But where are we knocking, and where is the field where we can? Because we're only talking about 5 percentage points. It's not 20,000 people. It's 5
sure.
4 to 5.
Yeah. So the big thing is MCDP does days of action. We do them every Saturday from 10 to 2. You stop in anytime during those. It's just in our office at 5111 Market Street in Boardman. We're also getting ready to start doing weekday hours. So that's and every door that we knock or phone call that we make is a reminder of, hey, vote yes on issue 1. Don't be deceived. So you can obviously get involved with us there. The campaign itself, I don't believe has a field operation. But so your best bet to get involved in helping pass it is to stop by our office. You can always go to fight.mahoningdemocrats.org and join the fight from there as well. So I was just going to say, boy, do I have the answer for you on that one.
I'm not connected to that. That's fine. I was just curious, from a higher standpoint where you guys were at, because again, I'm not expecting them to be knocking on my door because it's unnecessary in this neighborhood. But
sure.
I mean, I've had my kids will get involved doing phone call banks and things like that.
Yeah,
they're in Kentucky and Columbus and all over. But I have some time, in the early morning and evenings, and be more than happy to do that as well. Not just for issues.
Yeah, well, and Ken, you can always email that that the chair at Mahoning County Democratic Party email, and I can always set you up a virtual phone bank as well, and you can make calls right from your house. That way you can do it on your own time.
All right, cool.
And we give you talking points too, so we can help you, get started on that.
I got plenty of stuff to talk about. I don't need any of your talking.
Good.
So to give you an idea how good Al Catrona's data is, by the way, he knocked on my door.
Yeah.
As if I were somehow a persuadable voter. I opened the door and I started laughing. And I just said, man, you really got to get a new data guy.
Yeah.
So we have one last question here, and I'll let, because there has been polling, obviously, but I always preface polling with, especially at 20 days out from an election, polls don't vote. Yard signs don't vote. People vote. Polls are wrong all the time. The polls in 2016 told us there was no way that Donald Trump was going to win. The polls in 2020 said there was no way that Donald Trump was going to win and it was going to be a close election. Same thing now. The polls are incredibly close. I call it riding the roller coaster. Don't do it. Don't do it. But we are going to talk about some public polling because this is an incredibly popular issue. I'll be honest. We're on the right side of this. So I'll leave it to you guys because the only poll that I know of is the Bowling Green poll. So I assume that's the one you guys are in.
Yeah. And I'll just say, in addition to not riding the poll coaster, which I will say I'm very guilty of, I pay way too much attention to polls, but maybe I do so other people don't have to, maybe, question mark, I don't know. But in this situation, more than any before, I give almost zero credibility whatsoever to the polling. And the reason is because there is no comparable situation that we've ever had here in the state of Ohio where the ballot board has said, we are going to purposefully deceive the people of Ohio. We are going to make people walk in. We're going to go in with the goal of making people walk into the ballot booth, think that they know how they're voting, read the language, and get very, very confused. And so, look, there is no telling how many people may walk into that ballot box and say, I know for a fact I'm going to vote against gerrymandering today, and I think that's voting yes on issue 1. But then they read the language that the Republicans wrote and think, oh, no, that's not what I want. I don't want to support gerrymandering. I want to vote against gerrymandering. I'm going to vote no. So this is just super, super important. No matter what, even if someone in your life says, yep, I know, I got it. No worries. I'm going to vote against gerrymandering. Reiterate. Ending gerrymandering means voting yes on issue 1. If you want to change the system, if you want to get rid of gerrymandering, you have to vote yes. Voting no only keeps us exactly where we are, stuck with old political gerrymandered maps. So I would completely ignore the polling. We do not know if people are going to get confused when they walk in that ballot box like the Republicans hope they will. It's up to us to make sure they don't.
Hey, Chris. Can I?
So real quick, I realize we did not give you the answer that you were looking for, Jay. But both of us went on tirades about polling and didn't tell you that the Bowling Green poll does have this passing 60-40. But again, like Spencer said, that's not taking into account the number of voters who are. You got to remember, we're in a presidential year. A lot of these aren't the same voters that come out over and over and over again. These are folks that come out every 4 years. Yeah, that's the exact number: 60 support, 20 opposed, 40 undecided. So it's literally, if you give them all 40% undecided, they're it swings as a tie. Wait, no, that's not
wrong,
possible.
but I added wrong.
That's I was gonna say that's not. It made me look like a dumbass.
20 undecided. 20 undecided.
So,
My bad.
Yeah, 20
Been a long
undecided.
day.
Sorry. But I'm over there. Like, that math doesn't math. But go ahead, Lisa. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
No worries at all. I just wanted to add that probably one of the larger bipartisan groups that's been behind this from the get-go is the League of Women Voters. So if that helps your argument when you're talking to friends and family, if there's anything the League is, it's completely nonpartisan, and they have been 100% behind issue 1 passing. So if that gives any credence to the argument, there it is.
So, all right, we're actually a few minutes over on time here. So, anybody have any other questions? Anything that we want to talk through? All right. With that, I will just I'll give it to Spencer and State Rep McNally for some closing statements.
Yeah,
Thanks
well,
for. Go ahead, Spencer.
for so many times. No, please go ahead, Representative.
Totally fine. No, I just thanks for joining. And it was said earlier today, earlier during this conversation, but I'm just gonna reiterate, like, don't stop paying attention, because that's what they're hoping you do, and they're going to see how far they can push the envelope, pull the wool over your eyes, get you to not pay attention, like, hope that you're not paying attention and get stuff through. So just keep those eyes open. Know that you guys are smart, and that your voices can reflect that, and that, like we said, this is step 1, but we need to keep going to make sure that we get to a state that is safe, secure, prosperous for everybody.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Chris, for having me on. It is really, truly a pleasure to be able to join you tonight and talk to you all about issue 1. This is something I'm really passionate about. It's something I've been passionate about for a long time, because it's really fundamental to the way our state works and to our democracy. No one is saying if issue 1 passes, we're going to have a Democratic trifecta, and we're going to pass a bunch of Democratic laws, and it's going to be a bunch of sunshines and birthday cakes, right? Like, we are just asking for fairness. We're asking for representation for voters who have not had representation in a long time. The vast majority of voters who vote in the state of Ohio do not have a real impact on whether or not their state rep is a Democrat or a Republican. Those decisions are made by Republicans in a back room, by politicians in a back room, long before they ever make a vote. And so I have very strong opinions about the presidential race. I have very strong opinions about our Senator Sherrod Brown. There are countless races up and down the ballot that are important this year. But just to underline the importance, I genuinely believe there's no more important ballot. There's no more important issue that I will vote on, no more important person or issue that I'll vote for this year than voting yes on issue 1. This has the opportunity to fundamentally make our state more democratic, more fair, and more representative for generations to come. And I think that there is a real opportunity where in 5, 10, or 20 years, we'll be looking back at issue 1 and thanking ourselves for putting power back in the hands of people and taking it out of the hands of corrupt politicians. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors. Democrat, Republican, Independent. This is a bipartisan, nonpartisan movement to put power back in the hands of people and take it out of the hands of politicians and lobbyists. I would never be allowed to serve on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Chris would not be allowed to serve on the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and Representative McNally certainly wouldn't be allowed to serve on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. But we're all here telling you to vote yes, because we don't want the power in our hands. We want the power in your hands, right? That's what this is about. It's about putting power back in the hands of people. And so please, please, please go talk to your friends, even if you think that they know how to vote vote correctly to end gerrymandering, they may not. So remind them, be sure to vote and get out the vote to make sure we win. This is a really big deal. So thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight and with me tonight. It's been great to join you.
Yeah, thank you guys all for joining. Thanks, a big virtual round of applause for State Rep McNally and for Spencer for spending some time with us. So we will get this video uploaded so that we can share it around for everyone who wasn't able to make the discussion with us. If you need help making that plan to vote, or if people in your lives do, they can download a sample ballot straight from our website. Just visit mahoningsampleballot.com. That'll also help them make their plan to vote. There's 2 more weeks of early voting left. So it's go time. This is, like Spencer said, the single most consequential amendment that you have probably or will probably ever vote on is state issue 1 this election cycle. This is how we fix our state. So with that, if there's any other questions, feel free to email them over. You all have the chair's email there. And hopefully we'll see some of you around the office, and like I said, make your plan to vote. So again, thanks to Spencer and to State Rep McNally and to all of you for joining us. Have a great night, folks.
Thanks so much, everyone.